Okay, if you don't have your foldable in front of you, I would get your foldable first because we are going to complete the rest of it. So if you need to pause the video, please do that. Okay, so let's begin by writing what the shapes are. Our next one is a rectangle. Okay, so we have a rectangle, and then I'm just going to draw a standard rectangle. Our next shape is a rhombus. And most rhombus, you're used to it seeing looking like a diamond, so we'll go ahead and draw. We won't refer to it as a diamond, but that's kind of the typical look to it. And then finally, we are going to finish with square. Okay, so rectangle, a rhombus, and a square. So I'd like to begin with our properties of a rhombus. So let's open up rhombus. And I'm going to start all of these with a definition and then properties about them. So the definition of we're on a rectangle. The definition of a rectangle, it is a parallelogram. So a rectangle is a parallelogram. And you probably know the rest of the definition, a parallelogram with 4 right angles. A parallelogram with 4 right angles. Now, I wrote the word parallelogram instead of quadrilateral because it has all the properties of a parallelogram. So all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these properties apply, and it has 4 right angles. And it has one more property. Not only are the 4 angles 90 degrees, the diagonals have a property. The diagonals are congruent. The diagonals are congruent. So in a parallelogram, we said they bisect each other, but in a diagonal, in a rectangle, excuse me, the full diagonal is congruent. So let's come up here to the top, and let's draw yourself a picture. Now, I'm not going to add all the parallelogram properties, but I do want to add here the newer part of the definition. I have a right angle, a right angle, a right angle, and a right angle. And then let's see what it looks like to have congruent diagonals. So add your diagonals. So not only are they congruent, they also hold the property of bisectors just like the parallelogram. So if these are the same length, maybe 10 and 10, and they chop each other in half, that means all 4 sections have to be the same length. So it might be full length of 10 and 10, but when they're cut in half, it's 5 and 5 and 5 and 5. Okay, so that would be a rectangle. All right, let's move on to rhombus. And the reason we started with parallelogram is all 3 of these shapes are first parallelograms with additional properties. So they're all going to be parallelograms to begin with. So let's open up rhombus. Definition of rhombus. So it's going to start the same. It is a parallelogram. A parallelogram. And the item that makes it a rhombus is the sides are equal. So a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So all 4 sides are the same, but there are 2 more properties besides the 5 that go with parallelogram. The first property is about the diagonals. Actually, both properties are about diagonals. So the first one is that the diagonals are going to be perpendicular. So diagonals are perpendicular. So then when they intersect, it makes 90 degrees. The second one is when the diagonals intersect the angles, it bisects them. So diagonals bisect opposite angles. Diagonals bisect opposite angles. So I'm going to draw a picture so that you know what that looks like here at the top. Okay, so let's move this up. So I'm going to try to draw myself a large rhombus. So the thing about a rhombus is the sides are equal. So that's the very first thing that you should mark. Now let's add our diagonal properties. So let's add one vertically and horizontally. And they make right angles in the center. So they're perpendicular, so I have these right angles. And if it bisects the angles, then that means at the very top here, this diagonal has chopped either side in half. Okay? And then it's done the same thing down here, and I can put a single arc because remember, these were congruent to begin with, so they're equal on either side. So I'm going to do the same thing on the left and the right. So this is what it would look like to have perpendicular diagonals and it bisects the angles. Okay, let's finish up with square. A square is also a parallelogram with two other items. So the definition is a parallelogram with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. A parallelogram with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. Okay, and so really we don't have anything new to add because all squares have all of these properties we've written on the entire foldable. So I'm going to write here all properties of a parallelogram, a rectangle, and a rhombus. All properties of a parallelogram, rectangle, and rhombus. Okay, so everything we have written up until this point, all of these properties apply for squares. So the only thing I'd like to draw at the top here is just what kind of your typical square would look like. You would have 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. It would be a lot of there would be tons of marks on here if we added everything. Okay, so keep this foldable with you. We will practice this again on Friday.